Good morning, Mr. Ryan Haas. Welcome to this episode of Today on Wall Street. We're so great to have you here today with us. Mr. Ryan Haas, you are the Michael Armacost Chair in Foreign Policy Studies at the Brookings Institution. And before that, you were the China Director at the National Security Council from 2013 to 2017. And you served in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing from 2008 to 2012. More recently, you are the author of the book Stronger, Adapting America's China Strategy in the Age of Competitive Interdependence. The book I devoured in one sitting. I loved it. But before we get to the details of the book, can you first please tell us a little bit about yourself? How did your career path end up intersecting with the United States-China policy?
Well, first of all, Lizzie, thank you for having me on your show. It's really an honor for me to be with you. I grew up in a corner of the United States, the northwest corner, a small town called Bellingham, Washington. And my parents managed a golf course. And that's what our family did. And I grew up, I always knew that I loved what my family did and where I had lived, but I wanted to do something broader. And I went to the University of Washington in Seattle in the late 1990s. I'm aging myself here, but at that time, it was already clear that China, with its history, its national identity, its huge population, its growing economy, it was going to be a major force in the world. And I wanted to get a front row seat to understand how China operated and how the United States was going to deal with the emergence of China, which I thought would be sort of the story of our lifetime. And I was lucky enough to be able to join the State Department Foreign Service as a diplomat out of college. I went to Johns Hopkins SAIS, but basically entered the Foreign Service. As you mentioned, it brought me to Seoul and then to dealing with Taiwan issues and then to Beijing. And I was studying Indonesian, getting ready to go to Jakarta when I received a phone call indicating that I should go interview at the White House, which led to an opportunity to work with some of the most amazing people and work around the President Obama from 2013 to 2017. And over that period, I managed to, join with a wife, and we had 4 kids together. So I sort of feel like the luckiest man on earth. It's been a really just a wonderful experience so far.
Let's next get to the book, Stronger. At the beginning chapter of the book, Stronger, you described a trip to the Trump Tower to deliver a transition briefing to the leadership of the then incoming national security term. Can you remind us, how did that briefing go? What was your takeaway from that briefing?
Well, it was sort of a jarring experience. Just to provide a bit of context, President Trump had just won the election, and our instruction was to travel to New York to share with the incoming team what they would be inheriting in the U.S.-China relationship. Not to put any spin on the ball or try to persuade them of anything, but just to give them a factual accounting of what we had done, what had worked, what had not worked, and what lessons we'd learned in the process. And we got about 10 minutes into that conversation when the person on the opposite end of the table basically put his hand up and said, "All right, I've heard enough. We know what your problem was." And we said, "Oh, well, what was our problem?" And he said, "Your problem was you didn't understand that the United States is in an existential battle with China. And if we do not prevail and win that battle, the United States as we know it may not exist in the future." And that was sort of the end of the conversation. We downshifted into a casual talk about football and things like that. And then we left. And I left Trump Tower stunned at how the United States, with the largest fighting force, the most formidable alliance network, and the biggest economy in the history of humankind, could grow to feel so anxious and nervous about China's rise.
I see. So speaking of this sharp turn in policy from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, I think one illustration is a change in tone in national security strategy document. So in 2015, the United States National Security Strategy expresses the United States aspiration to, quote, develop a constructive relationship with China that delivers benefits for our two people and promotes security and prosperity in Asia and around the world. Just within 24 months, the Trump administration's inaugural national security strategy characterized China as a revisionist power seeking to erode U.S. security and prosperity. So what changed within the 2-year span, and how much of the policy shift would you attribute to the Trump administration's hawkishness versus China's increasing assertiveness under Xi Jinping's administration?
Well, Lizzie, I think you raise a really important question, and it's one that we're going to need to to understand better as time goes by. But from my perspective, U.S. policy on China shifted more sharply and more quickly than just about any other issue I can think of in recent diplomatic history that did not involve conflict. And from my perspective, both the United States and China contributed to that shift. I don't think that either side owns exclusive responsibility for the shift. From the US perspective, I think that there was a broad frustration with the range of Chinese actions, the increasing role of the state in the economy, increasing efforts by China to suppress dissent and control actions inside their society, a perception that China was pursuing more bullying behavior towards American friends and partners, and a sense that China was trying to use infrastructure diplomacy to gain strategic advantage and disadvantage the United States. But overlaying all of that was a sense that past US policy had failed. It had allowed an authoritarian challenger to emerge and contest America's leadership in the world. And so I think the Trump administration entered office with just a sense that we need to do things differently. We need to shake things up and make a sharp shift so that the trend lines of China's rise can be moderated. And so that's how it looked, I think, from the American perspective. From the Chinese perspective, my sense is that they felt like the United States was acting like a anxious declining power, was growing more insecure about the shrinking gap in relative power between the United States and China, and was becoming more aggressive in trying to suppress China's rise. And from that diagnosis, the remedy is not to become more moderate, to try to placate American concerns. I think the Chinese remedy was to push through, persist, and try to surpass the United States. And so both sides had a certain degree of frustration. And I think the net result was that both sides blamed the other for taking actions that caused the downturn in the relationship.
I see. So speaking of the Chinese perspective, in your book, you mentioned various interactions you had with your Chinese counterparts. I wonder, was there a particularly enlightening interaction you'd like to share with us? And sort of what's your general impression of the Chinese leadership from those interactions you've had with them?
Well, I have been fortunate. I've had an opportunity to interact with pretty much every level of the Chinese bureaucracy, from delivering demarches late at night on certain issues with Ministry of Foreign Affairs counterparts to having an opportunity to join in meetings between President Obama and President Xi. And so a few of the sort of impressions I take away from those experiences are that it really is important just to have that face-to-face interaction, both because it helps humanize the relationship. You know, we're dealing, these aren't big, immutable structural forces at work. These are human beings making decisions based upon the best available information they have, right? And the second thing is that I think it allows us to understand the challenges that China confronts as well. By listening to them, we can recognize that they are dealing with unanticipated events just like we are. Whether it's a coup in Myanmar or the Arab Spring or whatever it may be, not everything in the world, proceeds according to the Chinese plans, and it also doesn't according to American plans. And so we both need to adapt and adjust. And the more tightly connected we are with each other, the better we can understand what priorities and concerns are animating each side's behavior. But the final thought I guess I would offer, Lizzie, is that the one common thread of every issue that has been managed effectively in the US-China relationship over the past 40 plus years has been that it has been done between officials who are empowered, who have built relationships with the other, who understand the other, and have a respect for the other side. And we saw that even during the Trump administration. The one agreement that the Trump administration reached with Beijing was the trade agreement, which was the output of hundreds of hours of time together, negotiation, meals together between Ambassador Lighthizer, Secretary Mnuchin, and Vice Premier Liu He. So that is a immutable law of the U.S.-China relationship that I think that we should keep in mind as we think towards the future.
Fantastic. And, in addition to thinking about sort of issues between the two countries, in your book, you also focus on sort of strengthening America's domestic priorities in order to compete successfully with China. In fact, I think that's one of the central themes of your book. So tell us a little more about your concrete policy proposals. What are America's domestic priorities and how should we achieve them?
Well, my general view is that the United States' foremost priority right now is to restore its sources of strength, the things that America alone controls. And I think that there are three really major sources of strength for the United States. The first is its domestic dynamism. The second is its global alliance network. And the third is, for lack of a better word, its global prestige. And there are things that the United States can do in each of these areas to strengthen itself. And I'll just offer a few quick examples to try to respond to your question. On the domestic front, I think that we can try to rebuild consensus inside the United States around the benefits to the United States of its openness, its ability to attract the best and brightest minds from around the world to want to live and work in the United States. That is an advantage that the United States enjoys that no other country does, and we need to protect that advantage. But I also think that doing things like restoring research and development funding to historic levels, both basic and applied research, will help strengthen America's innovation base. Continuing to expand access to opportunity, creating greater educational opportunity for kids as they're growing up, will have a multiplier effect on America's competitiveness over the long term. And investing in infrastructure and the social safety net. The upshot is that on the domestic side, we know what we need to do. We've known what we needed to do for a while, and now we just need to do it. And I hope that we do so in the coming period. On the global side, I think that America has a unique advantage in terms of its convening power. It is able to bring countries together and galvanize global efforts in a way that no other country in the world can. And so we saw that, for example, with the climate summit that President Biden hosted last month. We saw it with the leaders of India, Japan, Australia, and the United States meeting together to develop an agenda for expanding access to vaccines in Asia and accelerating technology innovation and addressing climate change. So these are the types of things that we should and we can build upon. And then in terms of our alliance network, it is a real asset that the United States enjoys that no other country in the history of humanity has enjoyed. And the more that we can begin to think of alliances as platforms for addressing 21st century challenges, whether it's disaster response or future proofing against climate change, I think the stronger of a position that we're going to be in. And so I think that there's a lot that can be done, even in the current gridlocked political environment. These issues that I've identified aren't particularly controversial. And I think that small steps can lead to bigger steps, and hopefully momentum can be developed going forward.
Yeah, so those all sound like, fantastic ideas. And you mentioned sort of the polarized nature of US domestic politics, which could potentially make things a little messy. But even on the international front, the US has this ambition to build an alliance with like-minded countries. But let's remind ourselves that China has economic prowess, which it can potentially weaponize to coerce other countries to stand in line with China's priorities. So how confident are you that President Biden will be able to rebuild that alliance with like-minded countries? And how willing are our allies to work with the United States to confront some of the China challenges posed by the administration?
Well, I think it'll be important for the Biden administration to recognize that each of our alliance partners have its own unique and messy relationship with China. And we need to meet them where they are rather than asking them to meet us where we are, because the United States and China have a pretty unique relationship in the global system. But a lot of other countries, like you indicated, both see tremendous opportunity and tremendous risk by China's actions. And so meeting them where they are is the first step. The second step is, I think, starting small and building up. So the United States and India are going to have a different agenda as it relates to China than the United States and Japan are, or the United States and the European Union are. And being able to figure out where we have those overlapping interests and where there is mutual benefit to working together to try to influence Chinese decisions it's the essence of diplomacy. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be the product of hundreds of hours and many, many trips. But hopefully by investing that energy and that time now, we'll begin to see the payoffs later.
I see. So, in addition to being extremely clear-eyed about the China challenge, you also caution against inflating the China threat in your book. So can you just elaborate that point a little further? What are some of the downside risks of political weaponization by the United States?
Yeah, this is a pattern that is part of America's strategic culture. We see this happen over and over again. This idea of 10-foot tall syndrome. That our challengers are these figures of immense towering strength and farsightedness, how are we ever going to compete against them, right? We saw this in the Cold War when we had 10-foot tall syndrome with the Soviet Union. I think we may be going through another cycle of that now with China. And the problem with that, as I see it, is that it serves as a bit of a advertisement of our insecurities. The more anxious we feel about China's rise, the more pressure we feel to chase them around the world to try to block them and obstruct them from doing what they're doing. The more that we begin to raise questions in our allies' mind about does the United States know something about China that we don't? Does the United States know something about its own vulnerabilities that we don't? And the net effect of that is that, fundamentally, insecurity and anxiety are not attractive in state-to-state relations any more than they are in people-to-people relations. I think that we're better off. The argument that I try to make is that we're better off as a country in competing with China by maintaining confidence and awareness of our strengths and advantages in our competition with China. And that confidence is what allows us to pursue the relationship with steadiness, with patience, with cool-headedness. And that ultimately is what will be more attractive for our partners in wanting to work alongside us than being reactively anxious, insecure, and defensive about every Chinese action.
Fantastic. Thank you for that insight. In the book, you also strikes an optimistic tone. You argue that despite China's growth, its tremendous capacity for innovation, the United States still remains the stronger power in the bilateral relationship. So what's your reasoning here?
Well, it's a really good question. I guess I would start off, Lizzie, with a view that I would not write off China's future. I think that 1.4 billion determined, hardworking people are going to make progress, and I think that China will continue to rise. I hope that the Chinese people benefit from that rise, that they are able to enjoy security, prosperity, and dignity as China continues to develop and advance. But at a macro level, my sense is that the United States and China are racing ahead of every other country in the world. In terms of overall national power, we are just expanding our lead relative to everyone else in the world. But within a US-China context, I think the United States still has pretty significant advantages in its ability to compete with China. And I'll just share a few of them and welcome your reaction to them. But the first advantage is the culture of innovation that the United States has nurtured. And this has been an organic process that has built up over decades. But the combination of having predictable and transparent legal system, an efficient capital market, the world's best higher education universities, it all has sort of allowed us to serve as a magnet and a sponge for the best ideas and the brightest people from around the world to want to come here. And that has benefits. Companies like Google and Intel, Zoom, were founded by people that were born outside of the United States, and that's to our advantage. I think that the United States has benign borders and a pretty stable periphery. The United States enjoys food and energy security. The United States has pretty resilient and adaptive political institutions. They don't always work as well as I would like, but they're always changing and adjusting. And so you add all that up, along with the United States' role at the center of many international institutions in our unique convening power in the world stage. I think that should give us a high degree of confidence in our ability to compete with anyone. I would argue that the United States is the best positioned country in the world to meet the challenges of the 21st century. And also that the United States is strongest when it is improving itself and helping to galvanize efforts to deal with global challenges. And so part of what I'm trying to do with this book, part of what I hope the book will accomplish, is to give the American people, a sense of confidence and allow us to focus our energies where they can be most productively applied. Not on being anxious about every Chinese action, but on focusing on strengthening ourselves.
Great. Thank you so much for all the insights, Ryan. This is such a helpful conversation, and we'll make sure to include a link to your book in the show notes section so our interested viewers can take a look at the book. And I look forward to talking with you in the future when opportunities arise. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you so much for this conversation. Bye. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.